Hey guys. This is part 3 of What If Naruto was mentored by Kakuzu and became a bounty hunter. Hit like and subscribe if you like this one, and also please check the author in the description. Let's start.
We are paid, that's all. We are God.
Chapter 8 Complications. Naruto leaped from one tree branch to the next, Haro and Fu not far behind. The second round of the Chunin exams had begun only 3 hours before, and so far the team had simply ventured deeper into the forest, not a word exchanged among the three. The premise of this phase was rather simple. Mitarashi Enko, the arguably insane second proctor of the Chunin exams, had told the remaining teams that each of them would receive one of 2 scrolls, heaven or earth. Starting from separate gates, the teams would then enter Training Ground 44, otherwise known as the Forest of Death. To pass the second round, it was necessary to arrive at the castle in the center of the forest with both scrolls, meaning that they would have to intercept another team and take its scroll. It wasn't really a problem, of course. The probability that any team they ran into would have the scroll they needed was 50-50, so the plan of attack was to simply find a team, take it out, check the scroll, and hope that it was the opposite of what they were carrying. Naruto wondered if the exam could really be any simpler. Yes, the whole idea was theoretically a test of teamwork and strength, but Naruto and Fu had both undergone training with Kakuzu, an S-class missing nin. And Haro had apparently been brought up under the guidance of some great leader whom even Kakuzu seemed to know something of, if not grudgingly respected. The real issue puzzling Naruto was what they were doing in the Chunin exams in the first place. He wasn't complaining. The exams did present a great opportunity to observe the hidden leaf denizens and defenses for his eventual vengeance. But Kakuzu had proven time and again that he was not a man to go back on his word, which meant that the blue-haired woman in the Akatsuki cloak had somehow convinced him to bring the 2 Jinchuriki to Konoha. By that logic, Kakuzu was taking orders from Akatsuki, though the reason why escaped him. When the blonde had angered Kakuzu on the trek to the hidden leaf, the bounty hunter had briefly mentioned a battle he wasn't prepared for. That was intriguing in of itself. Kakuzu was a very analytical and arrogant ninja, choosing bounties and chasing them only after either coming up with a solid strategy, or realizing that their skills didn't even merit having one. To have agreed to a mission where he didn't yet have a plan meant that the former Takinin was either coerced into doing so, something Naruto found hard to believe, considering his teacher's personality, or there was some huge sum of money on the line, which equated to a very powerful target. Naruto didn't particularly care for being left in the dark. If Kakuzu needed him and Fu and Haro, he supposed, to remain in the Chunin exams, the blonde wanted to know why. Of course, the odds of him getting the answer were relatively slim, but he'd be damned if he didn't at least try. The Kyubi Jinchuriki was brought from his internal musings as Fu shouted, "Hey!" He turned his head in time to see Haro peel off from the group on a separate trajectory. Scowling, he motioned for Fu to follow him as he twisted on his heel and took off after the rain shinobi. In Naruto's opinion, Haro was a wild card. Even if the blonde didn't know what their exact mission was, he knew that he could rely on Fu simply because of their shared history. Haro had been trained by a completely different entity, held no formal allegiance to Kakuzu or either of his pupils, and possessed an unknown personality. Sure, he had explained his abilities, but even those didn't really tell his 2 teammates his skill level, or how he'd react in the face of danger, or any one of a dozen other situations Naruto could come up with, given the time. This situation, for instance. The 2 Jinchuriki found Haro crouched on a tree branch overlooking a small camp. The tips of his 2 katana bit into the bark of the flora and his arms were folded over the hilts, making him appear quite relaxed. Both Jinchuriki landed on the same bough, one on either side of him. Haro didn't even flinch. "What are you doing?" Naruto whispered fiercely. Haro turned surprisingly serious gray eyes on the blonde. "Look," was all he said. Naruto complied. Far below them were 3 genin, all wearing yellow outfits reminiscent of straitjackets with large X stitches all down the front of their uniforms. 2 of them, one with only one eye visible, the other completely blindfolded, were tending to a third teammate who bore slight burns, the only member who could see from both eyes. Privately, Naruto wondered how smart an idea it was to have only 3 working eyes out of a total of 6, but then he disregarded the anomaly. Naruto couldn't see the symbol on their headbands signifying village affiliation from his position, but the rebreathers all of them wore meant that they were most likely from the hidden rain. Fu apparently noticed too. 3 genin from Amigekure, she observed. One looks injured. What's the big deal? Harrow shot her a look of disdain. They are Aimnin. Hanzo's Aimnin. Naruto caught Fu's eyes behind their teammate's back and shrugged, clearly not understanding the cobalt-haired boy's point. Harrow apparently noticed Fu's confusion and elaborated, Hanzo is Pain-sama's sworn enemy, the cause of all the strife within Amigekure. Any of his underlings are therefore the enemy of Pain-sama and must be eliminated. Naruto stared at the back of the boy's head. They're only genin, he pointed out, hardly a threat to your cause. Our forces are small as it is, Harrow defended through gritted teeth. Whether genin or jonin, they are opposing the path to peace within my home country, and thus must be removed before they can do more harm. No. The Aimnin stared at Naruto, his face suddenly blank. Don't tell me that you're opposed to killing, he stated flatly. Fu snorted. Hardly, she muttered. Naruto shook his head. Anko had explained that killing was allowed, practically expected, within the forest of death, whether by wildlife or opposing teams. All the participants had been forced to sign waivers acknowledging the fact that they could die while within training ground 44, though the capacity for most genin to commit such a cold-blooded feat was rather small. Then again, Naruto and his team were hardly most genin. The blonde had killed before, but even considering the limited experience he had with killing people himself, Kakuzu had made sure that he'd become desensitized enough to death to deal with his new profession as a bounty hunter. And therein was the hitch. Kakuzu had taught Naruto that living a successful life meant having the money to afford the necessities, that money made the world go around. To get money, as a missing nin anyway, one had to kill and collect the bounties placed on the heads of other ninja. But in doing so, the killing had a purpose, an intended goal that led to the improvement of one's lifestyle. The type of killing that Harrow was proposing, it was senseless. At least senseless to Naruto, whose instructions were to get through the Chunin exams without drawing attention to himself. There was no connection between taking out the team of hidden rain genin below them and staying under Konoha's radar. He'd learned that while a person's cost of living was intertwined with others' lives, his was dependent upon the blood he shed by cutting down said others. The divergence from Kakuzu's teachings was somewhat stark, for the bounty hunter frequently killed either for the thrill or as a therapeutic tool, but Naruto was glad for the difference. Kami forbid he ever turn into a carbon copy of the former Takinin. Which brought him back to the issue at hand. Harrow wasn't going to let the matter of the rain team below pass easily. Naruto was uncomfortable with the prospect of killing the genin for no reason other than because they were Harrow's enemy, but on the other hand, they did need a scroll with which to pass the second stage of the exams. We need a scroll, but no killing, he warned Harrow. You said you had orders to obey Aizo-sensei, he corrected hastily. Well, right now I'm in charge, so you have to listen to me. We're not going out of our way to make trouble. Harrow scowled, but reluctantly nodded his acceptance. Naruto shared a nod with Fu before both of them leapt in opposite directions. The cobalt-haired boy stood, pulling his twin swords from the tree branch. The weapons weren't his, but out of all of Pain's followers, it was he who had the capacity to use them best. Apparently, one of the higher members, a Hashigaki Kisame, had tracked down some former member of the Mist 7 shinobi swordsman and killed him, collecting the money on his head and adding the legendary Thunderfangs to the rebels' collection of supplies. Being one of the few lightning users within Pain's ranks, the Aimnin had instantly been drawn to the swords and had devoted much of his free time learning to use them efficiently. However, Harrow had 2 unfortunate problems. The first was that he had limited to no formal kanjutsu training, so he could only use the swords effectively as a means of channeling and utilizing lightning, both chakra-natured and real, though he hadn't tried the latter yet. Kisame had taken the time to inform him of several of the lightning techniques the sword's previous owner had used. He had also handed him a scroll detailing all of said techniques, that he had apparently pilfered from the owner's hideout, but that was as far as his swordsmanship training with the Thunderfangs went. The bigger issue was that Harrow had smaller than average chakra reserves, which, combined with the fact that Raitan was more chakra intensive than the other elements, meant that he tended to lose stamina quicker than he should have. It was a problem he continued to try to rectify by expanding his reserves, but even still, he knew they could be larger. Still, Harrow was willing to make exceptions in certain, extenuating circumstances. Vengeance for the pain Hanzo had caused him seemed like a good reason to expend a bit of energy. Enough time had passed for Fu and Naruto to get into position. Time to get started then, he decided. Lightning crackled around the hilts of the blades, and when Harrow felt like he had accumulated enough chakra, he threw the blades into the ground on the edge of the campsite. Electricity sparked across the ground in random arrays, heading towards all three genin as Harrow shouted, "Reizo, Ikazuchi no Yudich." The two ninja who were uninjured jumped away from the attack, while the one who was lying on the ground was forced to take the ninjutsu, his body dancing as it surged with voltage. Per Naruto's instruction, Harrow had, grudgingly, toned down the power so that the technique only knocked out the target instead of killing him. There was a clang of metal on metal as Naruto burst forth from his hiding spot and attacked the blindfolded genin with his wakizashi, hitting a hastily drawn kunai. Apparently being blindfolded didn't hinder the enemy's sight, though it proved to be a moot point. Either the Rain Genin had no skill with close combat, or the element of surprise was much more effective than Harrow estimated, for Naruto took him out with a swift taijutsu swordplay combo. Both boys looked for their third opponent. Finding him encased in a bubble of dust held up by Fu, Naruto tried not to let his jaw drop in astonishment at how quickly Fu had managed to alter the technique Kakuzu had trapped her in a week ago to be used with her own element. "Impressed?" she asked with a smirk, setting her free hand on her hip. "Jinro no Jutsu, not bad, huh?" Then the dust prison technique broke, letting the Rain Genin drop to the floor. The Nanabai Jinchuriki scratched the back of her head, embarrassed. It was a gesture Naruto recognized as being strangely reminiscent of himself. Whoops. Guess I don't have that jutsu perfected yet." The one-eyed boy tried to scramble away, but Harrow was too fast, zipping forward and placing the tips of the dual katana at his throat. "Your scroll," Harrow demanded, voice brooking no argument. His captive pointed one trembling finger towards his unconscious, blindfolded teammate. Naruto walked over to the boy's prone form and rooted around until he found the scroll. "Damn," he cursed, looking at the word on the front. Scroll," he told his teammates, his expression sour. Fu sighed. So this was a waste of time. "What now?" "We take it," Harrow said. "The less teams that pass, the better the odds are for us to move forward." He channeled chakra into the swords, sending electricity pulsing into the one-eyed boy, who promptly collapsed to the dirt, motionless. "He's alive," Harrow stated coldly, feeling Naruto's glare at his back. "Fine," the blonde relented. "Let's go." Sabaki Q. Sand slithered up Shigeru's leg, quickly encasing the older Rain Genin. In short order, only Shigeru's face was visible, and his entire body was lifted 20 feet into the air. Sometimes, on the rare occasions between his constant insomnia and near-constant insanity, Gaara understood that the voice he heard in his head calling for blood was not his mother. His mother had died giving birth to him, cursing the village that had produced a Kazekage willing to seal a vicious demon into his unborn son, sacrificing his wife for the process. In those few moments of clarity, Gaara knew that the words whispered to him were from Shikaku, the one-tailed demon's sand spirit. Having never known love, though, Gaara had deluded himself into believing that Shikaku was really mother. Gaara's life had been miserable since birth. He had been the object of numerous assassination attempts, neglected by his father, his siblings, his village, because of the biju sealed within him. The abilities afforded by Shikaku, total control over sand, an automatic defense, an armor of sand layered atop his skin, had gone unseen since the days of the Sandaime Kazekage, who had created his famed iron sand techniques based off of the previous Ichibi Jinchuriki's powers. The trade-off between his powers and the consequences of hosting the One Tail was something that always bothered Gaara. Yes, he escaped from every mission unscathed and he possessed sand manipulation powers rivaled by none, but if ever tried sleeping, the demon consumed his personality and sanity. That wasn't even mentioning the insatiable bloodlust. After living with the demon for so long, Gaara had long since become desensitized to the blood he was told to shed. Killing had become a way to verify his existence, to prove that he was still alive. It was an insane stretch of logical justification, but all Gaara wanted to do was please Mother. Mother wanted blood. Sabaka Soso. And it rained blood. As his sand absorbed the red fluid, Gaara turned his emotionless gaze to his victim's two teammates. While the tall Aimnin had been an excellent sacrifice, he was not the redhead's true target. Here, take the scroll, offered the one on the right, placing said object on the ground. Yes, please spare us, pleaded the other one. Gaara stared at them, watching as their bodies trembled in fear at his show of power. These hidden rain ninja, they were weak. They offered no challenge to the Sunanin, merely fodder for Mother's never-ending appetite. But there was someone whom the Jinchuriki was interested in, someone who hailed from the drenched plains of Aim and who could perhaps slake Mother's thirst for blood. The girl with the pale green hair, something was different about her. Gaara wanted to hear her scream as his sand engulfed her, crushed her bones, and drank her life. She was a challenge, one he couldn't identify. But the demon inside him wailed for her capture, cried out for the redhead to smother and kill her with nary a thought. Her death would make Mother happy. Gaara wanted to please Mother. And if the blonde boy got in his way, well, the Sunanin was sure that Mother would have no problem with an appetizer. I'm looking for someone. Female, light green hair, walking around with a blonde. She's also from Amigekure. Tell me what you know about her and where she is, Gaara intoned. The two remaining Rain Genin exchanged nervous looks before the one on the right spoke up. WV never heard of her before. A hand made of sand reached up from the ground and grasped each ninja's leg. The sand quickly encased their bodies as Gaara stretched his arms out, hands pantomiming a grabbing gesture. Wrong answer. Sabaka Soso. As Kankuro walked forward and grabbed the scroll on the ground, Gaara turned and began to walk away. He cared little for his father's wishes regarding his part in Konoha's invasion or for passing the Chunin exams. He simply wanted that girl's blood. And he would have it. Let's go, he ordered his siblings. Temari and Kankuro exchanged a confused glance before following their younger brother out of the clearing. When Gaara was on a rampage, they'd learned that it was always best to stay away, lest they become unwilling victims. Hidden in the bushes, Inuzuka Kiba, Aburame Shino, and Hyuga Hinata shook in terror at the spectacle they had witnessed. As they silently recovered from what had just happened, the same thought passed through each of their minds. Can he help whoever he's looking for? Fu jumped beside Hero as the two followed Naruto through the forest of death. The trio had traveled in silence since their run-in with the Rain Ninja, though the quiet was rather tense in comparison to the one they'd been in before the encounter. She twirled a senbon idly between her fingers, a habit she had adopted completely by accident. During the trek through the forest, Kakuzu had found the time to teach her the basics of a hidden rain technique using the umbrellas she had grabbed from the Akatsuki hideout, something he'd apparently done to help keep their cover. It had taken nearly 20 minutes to gather all the loose senbon from her first practice with the technique, and she had sworn off trying the technique again until she needed it. Fu shook her head. She was getting off track. Something needed to be done about the animosity brewing between her two teammates. Hero, are you okay? The minute the words left her mouth, Fu knew that it was a stupid thing to ask. The cobalt-haired boy shot her a nasty look. No. I'm very displeased with Shinobus. He seemed to speak Naruto's fake name like a curse. Decision regarding those Aimnin. We should have killed them. Fu noticed that despite the anger in his voice, Hero's tone was flat and even throughout his reasoning. There was no point, argued Naruto. I'm not going to let you kill some random ninja just to satisfy some personal grudge. We're in a war, returned Hero, raising his voice. You're in a war, Naruto was quick to correct, coming to a halt on a thick branch. And perhaps after this job is done you can get back to striking down some helpless genin all for the cause of your precious Pain-sama. But right now, your mission is to participate in the Chunin exams and help us pass, and that is what you will do, he finished, punctuating each word carefully. Fu thought she could almost see the steam coming out of Haro's ears. All people had their boiling point. She had learned quickly that Kakuzu's was rather low, but that Naruto had a high tolerance with his temper, barring 1 or 2 pressure points. If she was interpreting Haro's body language correctly, the green-haired girl was about to see his. Haro sprang forward, the thunder fangs extended towards Naruto's neck. The blonde whirled, bringing up his wakizashi and catching the top curves of each blade, both fists gripping the hilt of his sword. Haro's stormy gray eyes were narrowed in silent fury, and despite his lack of sword skill, he seemed to be pressing the blonde back with sheer determination and rage. "Oh, for the love of, will you two cut it out?" Fu cried, exasperated. The girl went ignored as the two broke apart, each staring down the other. Haro held the swords up, bringing the tips close together, and gathering chakra in between their gap. A blue-white ball of lightning, about the size of a fist, formed at the tips as the aimnin glared at Naruto. The blonde's wakizashi took on a blue sheen as he channeled his own chakra into it. Fu groaned. Even though she didn't know Haro's skill with lightning release, Futon trumped right on almost every time. The boys charged. "Oh, Fu!" All 3 members of Kakuzu's team blinked, and forgetting they were really undercover, turned in surprise to see who had interfered with their spat. A team of 3 were headed towards them and closing in rapidly. Fu felt her stomach clench uncomfortably, the fear that she would be recognized having come to pass. Soon enough, standing on a large tree branch less than 100 feet away were a trio of genin from the hidden waterfall, the only team from that village which had managed to pass the written test. Ironically, and to Fu's immense displeasure, the 2 male members of the team were the bullies from the day she had met Naruto. Joy. Their leader, Hoki, if Fu remembered his name correctly, opened his mouth to say something, but a ball of lightning and a wave of air forced him and his teammates to jump to the forest floor. Fu glanced back to see that both Naruto and Haro had loosed their attacks at this new presence, and were now focused wholeheartedly on the enemies in front of them rather than each other. Apparently it was not enough to deter Hoki. "Fu, you bitch!" he shouted. "How dare you betray our village?" The Nanabai Jinchuriki merely rolled her eyes. "Yeah, 'cause clearly there was a lot of love for me back in Taki. Did no one wonder why I left? Did anyone even search for me?" Hoki continued to rant. "You were Takigaku's ultimate weapon, our chance to become great. You think that you can just leave and get away with it? Well, we're going to show you right here and now what happens when you go against us." Fu looked over her shoulder at Naruto, shooting the blonde a look that clearly asked, "Now what?" Naruto caught the gesture from the corner of his eye, his attention focused more intently on the 3 genin going through the same series of hand seals. His blue orbs flickered over to Haro, noticing that the boy hadn't moved but was paying attention to what was going on with a fierce intensity. "They know Fu's identity, which makes them a threat to our mission." The green-haired girl cracked her knuckles, understanding his subtle message. She grinned. "Cool." Fu prepared to jump down and engage Hoki and his teammates. "Katon Renkijutsu, Kurura!" "No," ordered Naruto, quickly forming seals. The fiery dragon was bearing down on Fu's position, and Naruto supposed it would have been a more impressive technique had it been performed by a single, higher-level ninja. As it was, "Sueton Miserapa," he finished, expelling a powerful jet of liquid from his mouth. Kisame had taught him the wild water wave technique as his first training exercise, stating that learning it was a requirement for all hidden mist ninja. While somewhat weak in theory, the secret of the technique was that its power varied with how much chakra was pushed into it. To combat the large dragon, Naruto was pouring in a decent amount of chakra. Steam blanketed the area as the Takinin stopped their assault. Naruto stopped his defense, the inhale and exhale of his breathing noticeable for several seconds. He could only assume that their opponents had cut off their attack to conserve chakra. Recovering himself, he glanced at Haro. "Would you like the pleasure?" Haro smirked. "Gladly." And then he was gone. The remaining 2 gazed into the thick mass of vaporized water, trying to see anything. Several of the training sessions Kisame had put Naruto through included the use of Kirigakure no Jutsu, the art of hiding in the mist, and so the blonde's sight had improved slightly in the impaired conditions. But with how far away he was, and so Fu could see clearly, he slowly performed the hand signs for the wind release, violent wind palm, and blasted the steam away. Now visible, Fu watched the scene below play out with interest. Haro had sheathed his twin katana and was all but dancing around the Takinin, engaged in a strange taijutsu battle that he was clearly winning. She cocked her head in curiosity as her teammate ducked under a roundhouse kick and jabbed his thumb into the back of the boy's knee. When the Takinin yelped in pain and jumped back awkwardly, Fu raised an eyebrow. The girl's own taijutsu training had been specifically modeled after Kakuzu's combat style, which focused specifically on waiting for the opponent to move and countering said movements with the least amount of effort and greatest reward possible. Fu had been taken on several bounty hunting missions while under his tutelage for a year and had seen firsthand how effective the man's style was. A caught punch followed by a vicious backhand and then a roundhouse kick powerful enough to shatter ribs. She had adapted relatively well to the style, but parts of it eluded her as Kakuzu tended to use the black threads in his body to complement his fighting prowess. Naruto, well, she actually had never really seen her fellow Jinchuriki use a specific taijutsu style, mostly because he preferred to use varied ninjutsu, like his teacher. If she had to guess, the blonde's physical skills probably resembled that of their teachers, if less refined and powerful. Kakuzu tended to hit hard, especially when bolstered by his earth spear technique. On the other hand, Haro appeared to be using a style similar to the Hyuga's Juken, though that should be impossible, considering that the cobalt-haired boy didn't have the Byakugan to see the body's chakra network. Interesting, commented Naruto, jumping to join Fu on her tree. He knows Kyushojutsu. Ah, Fu realized. That explains a lot. Kyushojutsu was a rarer branch of taijutsu that focused on striking the opponent's pressure points in order to disable or stall them. It was a difficult style to learn because it required knowledge of the human body, precision, and speed to use effectively, not to mention that it was difficult to pull off debilitating hits which had permanent or lasting effects. The orange-eyed girl wasn't entirely sure where Haro's speed was coming from, but he definitely appeared quite skilled with striking pressure points and evading other attacks. She glanced at Naruto from her periphery. The blonde was standing silently next to her, arms crossed and expression blank. He looked rather uninterested in his surroundings, as if one of his teammates was not, in fact, fighting against the odds for his life. Fu turned back to the battle. She could only hope Haro escaped unscathed. Haro dodged the majority of a small fire ninjutsu, taking a minor burn to his right leg. Kyushojutsu had its uses in combat, but more so when fighting one-on-one. Back under Pain's command, Haro had either been sent out on long-distance stealth/sniping missions or as part of Splinter Cells where incapacitating his opponents left room for his teammates to finish them off. However, with no backup forthcoming, he could only assume Naruto and Fu would stay away from the action unless he asked, and a depleting chakra supply. Haro was discovering the drawbacks of relying on it as a taijutsu style when outnumbered and alone. To dodge his opponents, Haro had been converting chakra to lightning, using the element in an original technique which drastically accelerated his reflexes and how fast he moved. The problem was that by using the move, the cobalt-haired boy had rather quickly used up the majority of his chakra. The only good news was that by sticking to taijutsu, he had conserved the remainder of it by not using any right-turn techniques. Most of the pressure points he had struck were restraint points, those designed to temporarily immobilize an opponent or cause them brief spasms of pain. But with his dwindling reserves, he needed to finish the battle, now. The three waterfall ninja had regrouped in a loose triangle, preparing for another collaboration attack. Haro dipped into his reserves and pulled out enough chakra to jet forward, ending up in the center of the trio. In front of him stood the lone Kunoichi, and he caught a look of shock on her features before driving up with the heel of his palm, striking the point in the underside of her jaw. She dropped like a sack of bricks. Instinct suddenly screamed for Haro to duck, and he fell to his side as Hoki's fist transited through the space he had just vacated. Hoki stumbled slightly with his momentum, falling to the ground as Haro swept his legs out from under him. The Aimnin rolled to his feet, diving forward, and evading a hasty punch from the second Takinin, to strike Hoki's teammate in the sternal notch, activating his gag reflex and forcing him to hack air involuntarily. Harrow took the opportunity to unsheath one of his swords and drive it through the boy's heart. The result was messy. With no formal sword training, Harrow had aimed for the most vital and easily accessible organ in a rather simplistic stab. The hit probably would have been clean except that the Thunder Fangs, unlike most other swords, were not ideal for physical contact, their use lying primarily in right-hand ninjutsu, and the topmost curve was now keeping the katana embedded within the Takinin's corpse. A low growl sounded from behind him. "You'll pay for that!" shouted Hoki, and Harrow was forced to abandon the blade as the other boy tackled him from behind. Caught unaware by the move and at the end of his stamina, the cobalt-haired shinobi could do nothing as the older male sat on him and rained blow after blow on his face and body. He squirmed as best as he could to evade the punches, but he quickly realized that he was at a complete disadvantage. Then two hands grabbed Hoki's head and twisted. There was a crack as his neck was snapped. "Well, that wasn't nearly as satisfying as I hoped it would be," Fu stated dispassionately, staring at the immobile body of Hoki. "I'll never go back to Taki," she practically spat, uncaring whether or not her tormentor hurt her. Harrow sighed in relief and took his teammate's proffered hand. Naruto jumped down from his perch as Fu placed Harrow's arm over her shoulders. The blonde walked over to the waterfall kunoichi Harrow had downed first, leaning down to reach her wrist and check her pulse. His lips were pursed as he withdrew his wakizashi from its sheath. Centering the blade over her heart, he plunged it through her chest, removing it immediately afterwards. "Find their scroll," he said, moving to the corpse of her teammate. "Oh, right," Fu acknowledged. She all but dropped Harrow to rummage through Hoki's clothes, while Naruto maneuvered the lone Thunder Fang from the other male Takinin's body. Wordlessly, he offered the blade to the grounded Harrow, who took it without a sound. "Found it!" cheered Fu, "and it's a heaven scroll, too, just what we need." She seemed to realize that she was interrupting something, for she suddenly fell quiet. "You killed her," Harrow observed, merely stating fact but failing to cover a tinge of surprise. "Yes," agreed Naruto. His blue eyes were cold and hard, the eyes of a ninja who knew what needed to be done. There was no pity, sympathy, or remorse as Harrow tried to analyze him. It was necessary. The Aimnin peered at his teammate for a stretch of time, while Fu's eyes darted between the two. It was as if Naruto was a puzzle that Harrow was trying to solve, but he couldn't find which piece went where. Finally, though, Harrow nodded at Naruto, as if finally accepting the blonde for his decision. "All right. Now, if you'll excuse me," and he promptly passed out. Naruto felt his vitals. "Chakra exhaustion," he diagnosed. "I guess we're setting up camp here for the night. Tomorrow we can head out." Fu smiled. "So I guess those two can get along after all." It was only the second day within the Forest of Death, and Sai honestly had no idea what was going on anymore. With an odd number of graduates from the Ninja Academy, Danzo, the leader of the supposedly defunct Root organization, had pressured the Sandaime into allowing one of his subordinates to fill in the missing spot of the Genin teams. Though the third Hokage had initially been opposed to the idea, the support of his two former teammates, Mitokado Hamura and Yudatane Koharu, two of the more prominent village council members, had essentially made his opinion null on the matter. So Sai had been assigned his current codename, been told his two teammates were Uchiha Sasuke and Hareno Sakura, and that they would be under the guidance of Hatake Kakashi. Two of the three names had rung familiar chimes within the boy's head at the time, and the third was of no importance. Danzo had informed him that his mission was to watch over Sasuke and make reports on his skills and progress. He wasn't sure what his leader's interest in the last Uchiha was, but it wasn't his place to question his instructions. Unfortunately, the parameters of the mission required Sai to interact with people, which meant exposure to emotions, something Sai hadn't experienced in many years. Part of Root's program involved the elimination of emotions in order to more effectively carry out the missions necessary to Konoha's survival. So while Sai had a clear goal of what needed to be done, his personality, or lack thereof, often clashed with those of his teammates, which made carrying out his missions slightly difficult at times. All things considered, he wasn't doing too terribly. Research and spying had revealed the purpose of Kakashi's initial test, which had allowed for Team 7 to become a true genin team. The D-rank missions were an insult to someone of his skill. After all, Root was simply a secret subdivision of the AMBU Black Ops, but Sai bore all of it with a fake smile, because he understood the importance of following orders and obeying his superior. The truly difficult part was disguising his skills as those of a common genin. Sparring practice and group training were the main issues. D-rank missions didn't require a high level of training, or any training at all, it could be argued, so performing those tasks while not revealing his skills had been easy. But every time Sai was forced to spar against Sasuke, or whenever Kakashi had them perform some random team exercise, the Root operative was often forced to tone down years of trained instincts to react as only an average genin would. It was rather frustrating, to say the least. But he had passed those obstacles nonetheless. When the announcement that Team 7 would be entered in the Chunin exams had been made, Danzo had given Sai new orders. The exams presented the perfect opportunity to fully observe the results of Uchiha's rigorous training against his fellow ninja. Sai had been instructed to assist the boy in getting through the first 2 stages of the Chunin exams. The third stage would apparently be single matches in which Sai could have no influence on Sasuke's performance. The written test had been easy enough. Sai's specialty lay in drawing and painting creatures which served a multitude of purposes: reconnaissance, message relays, and battle, primarily. Sneaking out his specialized ink brush disguised as a pencil and using it to create animated flies which could spy for him had been simple. The theory was similar to several strains of Kakachu bred by the Aburaim clan specifically for reconnaissance purposes, if a tad less precise. It was the second exam which had so far completely thrown the Root operative for a loop. Several hours before, he had been separated from his 2 teammates by a powerful burst of wind, a futon ninjutsu, he surmised. He had come face to face with a tremendous snake, but with no one around, he hadn't feared being caught going all out. Still, Sai was used to dealing with human-sized opponents, and so defeating the snake had taken more cunning and chakra than he'd expected. Perhaps the biggest surprise had come when the giant serpent had disappeared in a burst of smoke, much in the same way a summons would. The only people Sai knew of who could use snake summons were Mitarashi Enko, a likely possibility, considering the fact that she was proctoring the second exam, and Orochimaru, infamous traitor of the Hidden Leaf. Despite the likelihood of the snake belonging to Enko, the small possibility that it was Orochimaru's spurred Sai into action. Though his ink birds were fast, the dense foliage of the Forest of Death would hinder their flight, and so Sai had taken to tree jumping back to where he had been separated from his teammates. He had found them both in the same clearing he had left them. Sakura was leaning against a tree, unconscious but otherwise okay. On the other hand, Sasuke was out cold on the ground, a stab wound on his leg and 2 puncture marks on the side of his neck, beside which were 3 comma-shaped markings, plus a fever and some other scrapes and bruises. Sai was no expert with seals, having only the one on his tongue which prevented him from speaking of Danzo, but seeing as how Sasuke had never had such a mark before, the dark-haired boy could only assume it was a recent, and therefore potentially dangerous, addition. He had summoned 2 ink lions from the scroll he used for all of his ninjutsu, and the bodies of his teammates were placed upon their backs. Sai had found a hollowed-out tree base where he was able to deposit the bodies, then used some extra cloth and water from his canteen to soothe the Uchiha's fever. Being a nursemaid to another ninja was slightly humiliating, but Sasuke was needed alive by Danzo, so Sai had buckled down and did what was necessary. Shortly thereafter, Sakura had regained consciousness and quickly took over caring for the raven-haired boy, much to the artist's relief. Of course, not long after that, the lone team of ninja from Otogekure had arrived, forcing a weak Sakura and a tired Sai into battle in an attempt to get to Sasuke. Before too much damage was done, Rock Lee had appeared to defend Sakura, taking on the leader of the Sound Ninja and ultimately failing. Shortly thereafter, Yamanaka Ino, Naro Shikamaru, and Akimichi Choji had revealed their presence and attempted to fight the Oto team. Sai would admit they did an okay job, as far as being novices went. After their failure, Lee's teammates Hyugen Niji and Tenten had arrived, searching for the spandex-wearing genin. Before they could even interfere, Uchiha Sasuke had awakened, flame-like markings spreading from the assumed seal on his neck and covering the left side of his body. He had stood and easily incapacitated one of the Otonin, and more likely than not would have killed him if Sakura had not prevented him from doing so. Sai was inwardly grateful to not have to fight, for it solidified the image of a mediocre ninja with no special skills. Despite that, he was unable to fully comprehend the reasons for the other Konoha genin to intrude into Team 7's fight. He understood the why. Emotions, messy fickle feelings, pride, rage, affection, controlled their actions, but beyond that, there was no explanation for entering a fight which did not concern them. It made Sai glad that he no longer had the capacity to feel emotions. They seemed to cause a lot of unnecessary trouble. As the leader of the sound team placed down his scroll and retreated with his two teammates, Sai vaguely registered the Ino Shikicho trio coming out from the bushes and heading over to Lee's immobile form. With everything that had passed in the forest, Sai had a long report to make to Danzo, once he found the time to discreetly do so. High in the tree upon which he and Tenten had landed, Hyuga Niji shifted his Byakugan eyes slightly, looking to the bushes on the other side of the clearing. 3 people became clear to his vision, and he was able to make out the symbols on their forehead protectors. Amigekure, he thought. He wondered if they'd attack, but when one of them signaled the other 2 to follow the path of the departed sound team, Niji let them go. If they would rather waste their time with a scroll-less team than take on 3 separate groups of Leaf Genin, who was he to get in their way? Konoha are loud, Naruto thought, leading Haro and Fu quietly through the undergrowth. Their team had spent the previous evening camped out at the site of their battle with the waterfall team, after removing the corpses from the vicinity, of course. Haro had woken up after a couple of hours to drink some water and eat a small amount of food before returning to sleep. The next morning found the cobalt-haired boy at half strength, but capable of moving. So they had, if at a more sedate pace than the first day. But with 4 days left of the test, and their only goal being to reach the tower in the center, none of the 3 were worried about time. It was only when Naruto had broken off from their straight path around noon that his 2 team members had become confused. "I hear something," he had offered quietly by way of explanation. The scene they had come across had been rather hectic. Leaf Genin had all but crawled out of the metaphorical woodwork, combating the threat the strangely garbed, opposing ninja team had presented. "Can we go?" Haro had scowled. "Not yet," Naruto had replied. He turned to the other male. "What do you know about that team?" he continued, motioning towards the trio all the Leaf Ninja were fighting. Both Haro and Fu had glanced from the blonde to the other ninja and then back again. Fu shrugged as Haro succinctly stated, "Nothing." The blonde had nodded. "Exactly. If there's one thing Aizo-sensei taught me, it's that the more information you have, the better. Right now, I have no information on those guys, and my gut is telling me not to trust them." His attention returned to the scene they had been spying on, curses flying from his mouth when he realized they were gone. "Come on," he motioned, before slipping away. Which led Naruto, Haro, and Fu to their current scenario of moving along the ground, following the unknown team. "Where did they go?" muttered Naruto. "Kazu, check the area, will ya?" "You're not a very good tracker, are you?" Haro commented dryly. "Not particularly," admitted the Jinchuriki. "But once I find someone, they're in trouble. You know," he continued after a moment, "you're being oddly cooperative, all things considered." Haro leveled him with an even stare. "I told you, I'm a strategist. You gave me a compelling reason to follow them, and you proved to me that you know what you're doing with those Takinin." He took a deep breath. "You're right. My own desire to kill that AIM team was not in line with this mission, which should be my focus. I've decided that if we're to get through this, I'm better off working with you than against you, which means accepting your decisions. From now on, I'm dedicated to whatever you say our objective is, as long as it makes sense." Naruto seemed to take this admission in stride, but after a brief moment he nodded. There was silence as Naruto wondered if he should say something, but Fu preempted him with a hesitant, guys? Zankaha. Naruto kicked Haro into Fu and dove away just before a powerful blast of air swept through the place they had just vacated. The blonde wiped his brow with the back of his hand and let out a silent breath of relief. That was a bit too close. "Come out!" shouted a voice. "We know you're there!" All three exchanged glances before stepping out from the foliage to face their opponents. Naruto recognized the majority of their outfits from the Akatsuki hideout. Each wore gray pants with black splotches in a camouflage pattern, as well as a long scarf of the same design wrapped around their throats. One of them, Naruto guessed he was the leader, though he couldn't say why, had bandages wrapped around his entire face, save the left eye. The sleeves of his gray shirt, which were slightly darker than the pants, were abnormally long, and a large furry object, a cape was the closest thing Naruto could describe it as, covered his back. His male teammate possessed dark, spiky hair with two face plates starting from under his forehead protector and following his jaw line. One of his arms looked to be either dislocated or broken. He wore a short-sleeved yellow shirt and tight black cloth over his forearms. Two black stripes were imprinted on the shirt from his collarbone to under his armpits, and a third went around his waist, separating one of the three kanji for death on his shirt from the other two. His female teammate wore the same forearm bands as well as a sleeveless vest, and a second scarf was wrapped around her waist much like a belt. Her long, dark hair fell almost to the ground. Wrapped around each of their foreheads was a Heidi-8, the same, unknown symbol of a musical note engraved in the metal. "Who are you?" asked the partial mummy. "I could ask you the same thing," retorted Naruto. "What village are you from?" The spiky-haired boy laughed. "You've never heard of Odogekure? You ain't mean are all pathetic." "Zaku, shut up," hissed the first male. "Oh, come on, Dosu, you can't tell me you think these little babies present a challenge." "Odogekure?" queried Fu. "Where's that? And why haven't we heard of it?" "Oto is a new village set up within the land of rice paddies, led by Orochimaru-sama," bragged Zaku. Naruto and Hero shared a look which clearly said, "He's a talker." "This is our first appearance in the Chunin exams, and we're here to show just how powerful we are, and to fulfill Orochimaru-sama's desires. We'll have to go back and find a way to kill Uchiha Sasuke," he directed to Dosu. Zaku warned his teammates stop talking. "And with the curse seal in play, I'm not sure if killing the Uchiha is a good idea, let alone a possibility." The mention of Orochimaru placed Naruto on edge. He knew nothing of the man personally, only that his reputation preceded him. If the renegade Sannin was influencing the Chunin exams in some way, Naruto and his team would have to be extra careful. It did offer an explanation for why Kakuzu had come to Konoha in the first place, though. Orochimaru had a huge price on his head. Naruto was unsure of the exact value, which meant that he was extraordinarily skilled, a fact which accounted for Kakuzu's uncertainty in winning a battle against him. There was a moment of silence as Naruto turned over the information he had just heard in his head, the team from Hidden Sound subtly preparing to attack. Everyone seemed to realize the time for talk was over, for Naruto and Dosa ordered at the same time, "Kill them." "Zankaha!" shouted Zaku. The three fake genin scattered to escape the blast. "Kin, now!" The female, Kin, apparently, threw a flurry of Saban at Naruto, but the blonde easily dodged them. Chiming sounded out from behind him, and Naruto turned to see several of the Saban stuck in a large tree, tiny bells attached to them. Then the double vision began. Naruto tried to stop the world from spinning, but he guessed that he was trapped in some sort of illusion. I think I'm gonna hurl." Because Kakuzu never used genjutsu in actual combat, he had merely taught Naruto the basics of dispelling the illusionary techniques. During the course of being taught how to escape genjutsu, Kakuzu had inflicted several types of illusions he had picked up during his early years upon the blonde. The lesson Naruto had learned was that he was rather susceptible to that branch of the ninja arts, and that he could really only break a couple of the weaker ones with the traditional genjutsu release theory. It was a bit of a debilitating weakness in certain scenarios, but fortunately the blonde's healing abilities were enough to offset the danger his susceptibility to genjutsu could get him in. Fu watched as Naruto fell to his knees and clapped his hands over his ears. She moved to try and help him, but another flurry of Saban peppered the area between her and him. The spiky-haired Sannin, Zaku, she remembered, was keeping Hero preoccupied. The fight was surprisingly even, Zaku's loss of an arm counteracted by Hero's incomplete recovery from the previous day. Kin was preventing her from interfering with Naruto, allowing Dosu to zip forward and slam a strange device attached to his arm into Naruto's stomach with a brutal uppercut. Naruto coughed up a mixture of blood and bile, the red fluid also trickling out of his ears and soaking his head covering. Disoriented, with his vision swimming violently, Naruto could only grudgingly accept that the Sound Nin had a fair amount of talent, comparatively speaking, anyway. He vaguely registered the echoing of Dosu's voice, the mummified boy explaining how the device on his arm, the melody arm, altered sound waves to confuse and injure the foe. Their village was aptly named then, if all of their abilities revolved around the manipulation of sound and sound waves to gain the upper hand over their opponents. The blue-eyed boy squinted in an attempt to settle his vision. There was a slight glint of sunlight on metal, and Naruto could finally focus enough to realize that the bells Kin had thrown were attached to the samban by ninja wire. Despite his dizziness, he unsheathed his wakizashi and swung haphazardly, applying futon chakra to cleave the wires in two. The simple movement caused waves of nausea to roll over him, but he felt a sense of accomplishment in spite of his vertigo. "You can still move, huh?" came Dosu's voice from above him. "I'll take care of that." He swung down with the melody arm, this time targeting Naruto's head. "Naruto!" cried Fu, forgetting to use his alias in her panic. She took 2 saban to the thigh and 1 to the shoulder for the distraction. "Enough's enough," floated through Naruto's head. The blonde wasn't entirely sure how well he could control his faculties, between the damage from the melody arm and the dissipating effects of Kin's illusions, but pain suddenly flooded his body as Jiangu forcibly took over. Black threads shot out from the stitches in his left forearm, wrapping around Dosu's attacking arm. The tendrils wriggled into the holes of the melody arm, working to negate the threat which caused their user harm. Dosu tried to use his chakra to amplify the damage his weapon did, but the threads were unresponsive to the assault. Naruto's other forearm lashed out, attached to his body only by the cable-like threads, and grabbed the Sound Ninja around the neck. As more of Jiangu's tendrils slithered out from Naruto's arms to restrain Dosu, the blonde spared a careful look at his teammates. Haro was stuck on the defensive, unable to find the time to either move close to strike pressure points or back away to use his patented lightning techniques with Zaku shooting continuous blasts of air at him. He turned his head the other way, vision swimming with the movement, to see Fu countering salvos of saban from Kin with her own needles. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki lurched to his feet, stumbling in the process as his equilibrium was thrown even more off balance. "I'd love to stay longer," he informed Dosu, fighting down nausea in the process, "but I'm pretty sure I don't want to be hit by your little toy again." The mummified boy's visible eye widened marginally. Naruto fought to regain control of Jiangu, the struggle reminding him of his initial training with the Kinjutsu. Finally, recovering some measure of his equilibrium, he exerted enough willpower to extend his free left hand with the threads to grab his fallen sword, making sure to keep the tendrils from his forearm wrapped around the melody arm. Focusing intently upon Dosu's neck to control his strike, he took a second to steady himself before slicing the blade across his opponent's carotid artery. Nausea reclaimed him, and Naruto wondered absent-mindedly how much damage Dosu had inflicted to him with the one strike to still be feeling the effects. There was a slight slurping noise as Jiangu returned to his body, allowing Dosu's corpse to drop to the floor and his lower arms to reconnect with his elbows. Pushed to the back of his mind were the clamoring thoughts regarding the almost sentient nature of Jiangu's tendrils. All he could think of was helping his teammates. Naruto knew that he had no chance of using a pinpointed attack, so a broad one would have to do. He closed his eyes to better concentrate, discovering that without the double vision he could more easily focus on his goal. "Damn fox," he snarled, "why can't you help me now?" A dark chuckle echoed in his mind. This hardly qualifies as mortal peril. A little pain teaches one to not make the same mistake. You may consider that your help, child. Naruto was startled at the actual response, but he ignored it to the best of his abilities. His hands moved through the seals for the great breakthrough technique, opening his eyes long enough to send a large wall of wind towards Zaku. The spiky-haired boy turned around, shouting, "Zankukyakua!" The powerful blast of air countered Naruto's attack, completely dissipating the great breakthrough and allowing the residual of the attack to sweep over him. Several cuts appeared on his clothes and exposed skin, and Naruto idly wondered how disoriented he was to have one of his base attacks at a low enough level to be countered so easily. He slumped to the ground, using the trunk of the tree behind him as a backrest. Meanwhile, Zaku was crowing in delight. How pathetic! I don't even know how you fools got this far with such mediocre skills. This is the perfect warm-up for taking out Rai Zenkai. The earth broke and collapsed as a triangular bolt of lightning rampaged through it. Zaku released a short scream as he was engulfed in the blast, the powerful attack frying him almost instantly. Naruto closed one eye, spying Haro not far Zaku's position, his hands to the ground. The rain ninja was breathing heavily, and Naruto was about to comment on a job well done before Haro fell on his back, unmoving. Chiri Soho no Jutsu. Leaving the thought of Haro to later, Naruto smirked to himself, closing his other eye to nurse his double vision. It sounded as if Fu was getting ready to finish her battle. Despite the prevalence of dust in the atmosphere, Fu often complained that it was too much effort to collect enough for a legitimate attack quickly. As such, she had created the dust touch technique to turn non-living, solid materials to dust and increase the quantity of her specialization. She had explained all this to him on the way to the Akatsuki hideout, so he knew that next would come a powerful dust release move, like Jintan Jingadan. Naruto cocked his head in mild confusion. It wasn't quite what he was expecting, but it worked, he supposed. He had discovered that, because of Hidden Waterfall's focus on Suetun techniques and hatred of the Nanabi. Fu had been left in the dust. He chuckled quietly at the unintentional pun, and studying earth and wind releases to combine into Jintan. As a result, she had practiced and created many of those specialized attacks, such as the performed dust release, dust fang bullet, based on many water attacks, the Suigaden in this case. When he had called her a copycat and a cheat, she had merely retorted that dust was far more common and easier to create than water was, and he had promptly shut up. It was both humiliating and humbling to recognize that she was right. Footsteps brought him back to his senses, and Naruto opened one eye to see Fu standing above him, hands on her hips. He saw her orange eyes shift over to Haro's prone form before she sighed. Boys, she huffed with a roll of her eyes. Naruto tried to smile at her, but it came out as more of a grimace. Fu ignored the gesture and walked over to Haro, picking him up and carrying him over to where Naruto was leaning against the tree. Chakra exhaustion, again, she stressed, laying him on the ground. Honestly, what the hell were you two doing? And why did you let him fight when he wasn't fully recovered? He's a bit difficult to stop when you have, no balance, Naruto groaned. Fu rolled her eyes for a second time. Honestly, what am I supposed to do with you two? She asked rhetorically. Looks like we're here for another night. We'll have to get to the tower tomorrow. Naruto nodded, but stopped, the motion making him sick again. He thought he could hear the Kyuubi laughing at him from his mindscape. Bastard, he thought. Then sleep claimed him. When Naruto woke in the late morning the next day, the first thing he noticed was that the world no longer spun. He sat up, fighting a brief sense of vertigo, then swiveled his head to see if his balance had been restored. When his self-diagnosis was finished, he stood and stretched. Everything seemed fine. Oh, you're awake, remarked Fu. She strolled over and gave him a small amount of the rations she had scavenged from the forest, as well as a canteen. He drank greedily as she continued. Haro woke about 15 minutes ago. We're ready to leave when you are. The blonde shot her a quick thumbs up, and she nodded in response. They vacated the clearing 5 minutes later. Haro looked a bit paler than normal, and Naruto guessed that he had recovered maybe 30% of his total chakra. Fu kept shooting the cobalt-haired boy worried glances, as if expecting him to collapse at any moment. Fortunately, tree jumping didn't require a large exertion of energy, and after several hours of travel, they reached the tower in the center of the forest. All three stared at the building, the same thought drifting through their minds. Thank Kami. After living for close to a century, Kakuzu had acquired a fondness for reading old books. Information was power, and it was impressive what one could learn from texts with enough time and dedication. As such, he'd taken to checking out books from the Konoha library and poring over them, taking advantage of the opportunity presented to him while stuck within a village he hated. Unfortunately, the process was frustrating. Originally, he had hoped that information on Orochimaru would be available, but because he was a foreigner, there were too many restrictions on what he could and could not look at. Even a Hidden Leaf citizen probably wouldn't be able to find much on one of his village's major traders in a public area. It was an annoying obstacle to come across because the man's talents were a mystery. The root of the issue actually lay in the fact that a large amount of the higher-level ninja, mostly S-class, but some A-class, did not have their full abilities listed within any edition of the bingo book, either Hidden Village or Bounty Hunter versions. This was because, while several S-class ninja were generally renowned far and wide, few other ninja either knew their skills or lived through encounters to report on them. Kakuzu's book, which was much more expansive than the normal one, was surprisingly lacking in this area as well. If Setsu's, Konan's, and Orochimaru's absent profiles were any indication, thought at least the Snake Sannin had an entry, albeit an uninformative one. Kakuzu appreciated the secrecy in his own case, but it became a rather frustrating occurrence when he needed the information for his own uses, especially when he was going up against someone of Orochimaru's caliber. Finding an apparent dead end there, the mercenary had moved on to a different research topic, the Uzumaki clan. The bad thing about living a long time was that, while he could retain a lot of information, some of the older tidbits got lost to time. He could vaguely remember hearing about the existence of an Uzumaki clan, but so far as he knew, its members had never held prominence in any of the main villages, and whispers of them had disappeared decades ago, meaning that he'd stopped giving them attention. It was like trying to recall the days when Taki had wanted to claim glory and sought ways to eliminate people the likes of Kinkaku and Ginkaku of the Hidden Cloud. He could remember their names, but nothing pertinent about them. His student's lack of information about his own family was intriguing, though it was hard to say exactly why he was putting in such legwork for the blonde. Originally, the boy had been a way for him to get more money, and he'd raised him the same way he trained himself back in the founding days of the hidden villages. At some point, and he could probably trace it to Naruto's similarities to himself, the same reason he'd bestowed the Earth Grudge Fear Kinjutsu upon him, Kakuzu had changed his mind about what his pupil would be to him. He would be more than just a source of income. He'd become a message the Nukenin wanted to deliver to the world. Naruto still had a long ways to go, however. He was inexperienced in actual combat, which was probably as much Kakuzu's fault as it was the blonde's, not that he would ever admit it, and his training was spread thin in several different directions, leaving him woefully non-specialized. It would be a boon later on, when he would have a broad range of skills to call upon and the expertise to back them, but at this stage, it could just be considered confusing. He was also, sadly, arrogant about his abilities, a trait he'd probably picked up from his teacher, and as Kakuzu frequently pointed out, the blonde's arrogance had yet to be earned. One day, the younger thread user would become a top-notch shinobi, but until that point, Kakuzu fully expected him to misstep, learn from his mistakes, and stumble along the path, and the mercenary would be there to ridicule his student every step of the way, pushing him to become better. A knock sounded at the main door of his room, drawing him from his musings, and he called out, "Yes?" The voice that returned to him was pure business. "ENBU," he guessed. "Your team just checked in. They have passed the second stage of the Chunin exams. I am here to escort you to the tower in preparation for the third stage." "Very well," Kakuzu acknowledged. He placed down the scroll he had been reviewing and went to open the door. "Lead the way." "Naruto, Orochimaru, just what are you both capable of? Time marches on. I suppose I will find out soon enough." Chapter 9, Strategy. "You look like hell." Naruto shot Kakuzu a filthy look. "You try spending 3 days in a forest surrounded by enemies and engaged in near-constant battles to the death, then come talk to me." The fake Jonin leveled an even stare at his student. "I call that a Tuesday. Your excuses are unfounded. Perhaps your skill level is not as high as you believe it to be. Many of the missions I have embarked upon were undoubtedly more dangerous than whatever challenges you faced in that forest." Naruto seethed quietly as Kakuzu turned his attention to Fu. "On the other hand, you appear relatively undamaged," he noted. Fu smiled at Kakuzu. "I try," she chirped. Though he hated to admit it, Naruto knew that his teacher had a point. Fu had emerged from the forest of death almost completely unscathed. A couple of tiny pinpricks from where Qin's saban had struck true and a jagged tear in her scarf from where she had ripped it to use as a bandage for Harrow, but otherwise she was completely clean. The blonde quickly analyzed himself. He knew that his head covering was crusted with dried blood from his previously ruptured eardrums, courtesy of Dosu, and a mixture of blood and bile had splattered onto his shirt and scarf. Dirt and grime covered a fair amount of his clothes, arm bandages, and skin, and the cuts from Zaku's decapitating airwaves attack remained on his body, the QB refusing to heal them on principle. By far, the worst off was Harrow. Bruises littered his face from the beating Hoki had given him, and there were multiple slashes in his clothing from his battle with Zaku. The small burn on his leg from his battle with the hidden waterfall team, which Fu had attempted to treat with native plants and her scarf as a wrapping, had turned pink and blistered slightly. Like Naruto, he was covered in dust and other signs of tramping through the wilderness, and exhaustion exuded from his body in waves. Naruto wondered briefly why Fu didn't have the same dirt smears symbolizing days in the wilderness that he and Harrow were covered in, but realized quickly that she must have taken the time to remove them by using her control over Doton and Jinton, talent her two teammates lacked. Damn her. The trio had arrived at the tower 40 minutes prior, and Kakuzu had only just appeared, led by one of Konoha's ANBU. His presence, though normally intimidating and slightly foreboding, actually relieved Naruto somewhat. It meant that, despite all of the obstacles in the forest of death, Kakuzu was still incognito and thus the mission, whatever it was still underway. He really wanted to talk with the older ninja about what the hell was going on, though. Yeah, we get it, Kazu's the favorite, Naruto jibed bitterly. Can we talk? Before Kakuzu could respond, Mitarashi Anko walked over to the quartet. We've prepared a room for you guys to stay in while we wait for the other participants to arrive, she informed them. It's down that hall, third door on the left. We'll let you know when the second exam is officially over. Kakuzu nodded in understanding and the purple-haired proctor walked away. Grab Harrow, Kakuzu ordered Fu, he looks ready to collapse. I believe you are more capable of handling tasks than Shinobu is at this point. Suddenly, the need to speak to the older shinobi about their mission was less important than satisfying the desire to show Kakuzu what he could do when properly incensed. You damn! He snarled, bunching his fists as if in preparation to attack his teacher, but Fu's restricting hand on his shoulder silently told him to let it go. He growled angrily but acquiesced, following the bounty hunter down the hallway as Fu slung Harrow's arm over her shoulders and half-carried, half-dragged him to their assigned room. Midnight found Naruto lying wide awake, his thoughts tumultuous. For all that the blonde felt he owed Kakuzu, taking him in and raising him, even if the man had tried to kill him first, teaching him, albeit haphazardly, there were times when the old ninja could be simply infuriating. Kakuzu was in the habit of keeping his personal agenda to himself, only letting Naruto know the details of his missions if he found it pertinent. Normally, Naruto would shrug and write it off as a quirk of a ninja who had lived alone for far too long. But on the rare occasions when the blonde was involved in some plot of the former Takinins, the Jinchuriki would admit that knowing what the hell was going on was a nice perk. Naruto felt that his relationship with his teacher was more complicated than it needed to be. Truthfully, there were times when he wasn't even sure if the Nukenin liked him at all. Kakuzu's antagonistic and sadistic nature was so counterintuitive to every stereotype Naruto had imagined as applying to caring and family that it was hard to make the two ideas compatible with the only man to acknowledge his existence. The addition of Fu to their semi-dysfunctional group, while not a mistake, had certainly opened up more realms for Kakuzu to aggravate his blonde pupil, often done by comparing the prowess of the two Jinchuriki. Though since Naruto and Fu had only had 3 months together with the former waterfall shinobi before they'd split up, opportunity had so far been somewhat limited. Case in point, upon arriving in their room, Kakuzu's few words went to praising Fu on her skills during the second portion of the Chunin exams. Granted, praise was a loose term. He had focused more on verbally abusing Naruto with regard to his lack of talent and unkempt state, while saying nothing of the sort about the green-haired girl. But the lack of attention to Fu's faults made Naruto angry and frustrated with both her and Kakuzu. It wasn't the former's fault, of course. Naruto could hardly blame his fellow Jinchuriki for exiting the forest of death in better condition than he had, but the bite of feeling replaced, and subsequently ignored and ridiculed, stung. Given time and privacy, he would have liked to talk to Kakuzu about the man's treatment of him. If that was the only problem, Naruto might have postponed the conversation he wished to have with Kakuzu. The real issue was that the blonde actually needed to talk to his teacher about something else very important, though he snorted at the idea that Kakuzu would ever consider hurt feelings important. There were suspicions crawling through his mind about their purpose in the Chunin exams, and very few said assumptions sat well with him. But every time he had tried conversing with Kakuzu, the bounty hunter had merely shrugged him off or ignored him, resulting in his current sleeplessness. Naruto swung his legs over the side of his bed, noting that both Haro and Fu were sound asleep. He crept to the door separating their room from Kakuzu's, opening it and slipping quietly inside. His stealth proved to be unnecessary when he saw Kakuzu sitting on his bed, studying a scroll. He waited for his teacher to say something, but after a minute passed during which Kakuzu only blinked and continued to read, Naruto grew annoyed. "I've been trying to talk to you all day," he accused suddenly, frustration evident in his voice as he took a heavy step forward. "I had not noticed," intoned Kakuzu, unraveling a bit more of the parchment. His lack of attention to Naruto caused the blonde to grow steadily angrier. Fueled by his growing aggravation, Naruto lunged forward and grabbed the scroll out of Kakuzu's hands. "We will talk," he growled. Kakuzu stood up, and Naruto remembered in that instant why getting on the man's bad side was a terrible idea. The Nukanin's very being exuded a mixture of power and evil, of respect demanded and expected. Naruto gulped. "You presume to order me around, brat?" asked Kakuzu, his voice deathly quiet. "Me, who saved you from a wretched fate, trained you, and molded you to be a proper shinobi?" Naruto hesitated in answering. Despite everything he and Kakuzu had been through, or perhaps, because of everything they had been through, the blonde often forgot how absolutely terrifying his teacher could be. There was an overwhelming pressure in the atmosphere, and he felt as if Kakuzu's immense chakra was suffocating him. "And no," he choked out. And then the tension was gone. Naruto breathed, surprised at how easy the action came to him. Kakuzu held out his hand, silently demanding the scroll. His pupil handed it over wordlessly. There was a moment as Kakuzu returned to studying the paper in which Naruto wondered if he was better off leaving the room. Following this thought, he turned around and made for the door, but a crisp halt made him pause. "You wish to say something?" The mercenary continued as if the previous moment had not occurred. Dozens of thoughts ran through Naruto's head, each one as pertinent as the last. "Why are we here?" he finally settled on asking, returning to his original reason for approaching the older shinobi and turning to face him once more. Beneath the rain ninja disguise, Kakuzu raised a single eyebrow. "I have already told you not to look a gift horse in the mouth, brat," came his smooth response. "You're after Orochimaru, right?" he hazarded, ignoring the excuse. Though there was no visible reaction, Naruto knew that he had the man's attention. Kakuzu had told the three genin upon their arrival in the room that Konoha wasn't watching them as closely as he would have guessed, and so Naruto felt comfortable openly discussing his ideas. "I'm not stupid, Kakuzu. I know you, and I know that this whole thing is just a charade. What did that woman from Akatsuki want?" There was a long moment of silence during which Kakuzu's strange green eyes bore holes through his student. Naruto tried not to fidget under the intensity of his scrutiny. "No, I suppose you are not stupid," he stated finally. "Aggravating, perhaps, but I have seen to your intelligence quotient. What draws you to the conclusion that I am here for Orochimaru?" "We had a run-in with some of his genin in the Forest of Death," Naruto explained. He pointed to the blood crusted into the cloth around his ears. "They did this. I'm not sure what the exact attack was, but apparently all of them had abilities related to manipulating sound. I'm pretty sure I got caught by some sort of auditory genjutsu." "Perhaps," the bounty hunter mused, "but hearing is an interesting sense to manipulate. If they truly did have some mastery over sound, then it would not be a far stretch to assume they would be able to attack your inner ear with specific pitches and frequencies of sound waves. Such an assault would make you experience a loss in equilibrium, and thus could have results similar to experiencing an auditory genjutsu. Still, I am disappointed that you were caught so unaware. Have you learned nothing? Naruto had the fair grace to look slightly ashamed. I was caught off guard. It won't happen again. See that it does not. But how do you even know all of that? I have been alive for a very long time. Sometimes there is little to do on the road but learn. Physiology is an important topic for shinobi to understand. Kakuzu stared at the blonde before turning his attention back to the scroll. As long as you have learned something from this experience, I consider the results satisfactory. There was a beat of silence while Naruto waited for Kakuzu to say something else. When he didn't, the Jinchuriki prompted, Orochimaru? Even though his teacher's eyes were focused downward, Naruto was sure the man rolled them in aggravated exasperation. Why are you taking such an interest in my affairs, brat? I'm just trying to understand, shrugged the blonde. Kakuzu leveled him with an even stare, but made a sound Naruto translated to a heavy sigh. I have been asked to eliminate Orochimaru. Naruto arched an eyebrow. Akatsuki wants you to kill Orochimaru? If they're so interested in the money, why don't they do it? Akatsuki has no interest in his bounty, simply his death. Apparently he was once a member, and intelligence suggests that he is slated to make an appearance during the Chunin exams. Your run-in with his subordinates would seem to lend credence to such rumors. You get to keep the money? Kakuzu nodded, and Naruto whistled. That's gotta be a pretty sum. Wait. He paused, a frown marring his lips as he went over what he knew about Akatsuki. Kisame said that Akatsuki's primary goal is collecting money. If they're passing up such a huge sum by letting you keep it, there's gotta be another agenda here. Kakuzu remained oppressively silent as Naruto reached his conclusion. You know what their real plan is, don't you? He asked quietly. Kakuzu stared at his first student intently, ruminating on what his next course of action should be. This was the fork in the road that determined whether he supported the path he wanted his pupil to walk, or try and ally himself with Akatsuki and work towards the lure of world domination and limitless cash. Even disregarding the fact that he wanted to use Naruto to make a statement to the world, there was a lot of value in having the two Jinchuriki working under his command, including his original plan of profit-sharing any of their future bounties. As far as resources went, his two students were far from being disposable. But now he was being forced to weigh the consequences of keeping them, Akatsuki coming after him a highly likely scenario, against the option of turning them over to the criminal organization and reaping the profit for the deed. 3 years ago, it probably wouldn't have even been a question which he'd choose, but after investing Jiangu in the boy, the decision wasn't nearly as clear-cut as he thought it should be. Screw it, he thought, and the words were so Naruto that Kakuzu almost laughed. Akatsuki has its sights set on capturing the Biju in order to achieve world domination, he stated. Naruto was so shocked at this revelation, let alone the fact that Kakuzu had just told him, that he took a step back. What? The woman who approached me is named Konan, he began, choosing to repeat the information he had divulged minutes before. She told me that Orochimaru was once a member of Akatsuki and that they had evidence he had plans to invade Konoha during the Chunin exams. I was informed that they wanted me to kill him, and if I refused, they would take Fu. Naruto pondered this information, a slow smirk spreading across his lips. You got blackmailed by Akatsuki to come here and you accepted their offer in order to save Fu's life. Kakuzu, you really do care. As if to emphasize how touching the moment was, Naruto placed a hand to his heart in mock appreciation. Do not think I did it for either her sake or yours. Kakuzu denied venomously. Konan offered me the money Orochimaru's head is worth, and that was not an opportunity one was willing to pass up. Your safety is no concern of mine. The blonde Jiangu wielder peered intently at the former Takinin. Despite all their years together, Naruto still found it extraordinarily difficult to read Kakuzu when the older ninja didn't want him to. Okay, Kakuzu, if you say so. Then he paused. Wait, he realized Konan didn't say anything about me. Does that mean they don't know about? That I do not know, admitted the bounty hunter, but we should assume that they know of your condition in spite of the lack of evidence. Naruto nodded his understanding, but then remembered something else he wanted to ask Kakuzu about. In the forest, he began slowly, carefully choosing what he wanted to say. There was a moment when Jianga kind of took over. Kakuzu stared at him. Naruto felt that he could almost see his teacher's thought process and mentally debating what to tell him. Kenjutsu are classed as such because there is some property of the technique that is either dangerous to the user or too powerful for widespread use among a population. Sometimes both, he chose to say. Your experience with Jiangu is limited, but the threads have a level of sentience that is necessary for many of the higher functions the technique is capable of. There is an instinctual understanding of self-preservation that connects the threads to your body. I presume that you were in some form of danger? At Naruto's nod, the bounty hunter continued. Then Jiangu was doing its job by acting in a defensive manner and protecting its host from a potential threat. Do not worry yourself with such trivialities. Sensing a dismissal and pondering this new revelation, Naruto began walking to the door but stopped to say rather defensively, Fu had the easy opponent. Jealousy does not become you, Naruto, Kakuzu tossed out as Naruto continued his trek back to his bed. The blonde allowed time to process the comment as Kakuzu continued, there is a reason why you are the only other individual to become imbued with Jiangu. You should not allow the words or actions of others to compromise your self-image. With that, the Kyuubi's jailer went to bed feeling an unfamiliar mix of satisfaction and relief. The remaining several days passed without incident as Kakuzu pored over scrolls gathering information, and Haro recovered from his injuries suffered within the forest of death. Finally, a Konoha Chunin came and informed them that the second exam was over and that they should follow him to where the Hokage was slated to make an announcement. They arrived in a large arena with viewing balconies placed high along the two longer walls and a large statue of two hands in the ram seal at the front wall. Naruto took his place next to the other genin teams, Fu and Haro standing linearly behind him. As Kakuzu moved to stand beside the other Jonin teachers, Naruto took notice of his team's competition. Almost all Leaf-nin, he noticed and discussed, including the Uchiha, Nara, both Hyuga, and all their team members, as well as a team led by a silver-haired adolescent, and a lone group from the hidden sand consisting of Gaara and his teammates. Naruto's mind wandered as the third Hokage began to talk. He was still attempting to wrap his mind around all the information Kakuzu had given him the other night. If Akatsuki truly was after the Biju, then he and Fu were in grave danger. Both Jinchuriki had a fair amount of skill in their respective areas, at least Chunin level, if not higher, he guessed, and still had room to grow, but compared to the threat Akatsuki posed, they might as well be flies. Naruto didn't have an accurate gauge of each member's power level, but since he hadn't yet beaten Kakuzu, an honorary member of sorts, it seemed, or Kisame, a full-fledged member, in battle, it was unlikely that he or his fellow demon container stood much of a chance against any one of them anyway, let alone a group. Perhaps the most curious piece of information Naruto kept coming back to was something Kakuzu had not directly told him, the fact that the bounty hunter did not have a designated alliance to the shadowy organization. The blonde had long entertained the notion that the ex-waterfall ninja was a self-serving, opportunistic man, or a selfish bastard, and by revealing Akatsuki's real plans to him, when he could have easily kept quiet, which would have made more sense if he was completely allied with the group. Kakuzu had proven that he would do whatever was in his best interest. Whether turning in the two Jinchuriki was more lucrative than keeping them alive was an entirely different story that Naruto didn't have enough information to accurately predict the ending to. Still, it boded well that Kakuzu had confided such sensitive information unto his blonde pupil. Such an act indicated that the old Nukenin actually cared about the two youths, even if he would never admit it, or else showed it in the worst way possible. But barring that, Naruto now had time to plan. For what he could only guess, but he knew that he would have to get much stronger, much faster, if he ever had hope of surviving Akatsuki and getting vengeance against Konoha. The undercover Rain Genin was brought from his reverie by a nudge from Fu. He shot her a questioning look, to which she responded by tugging him up one set of stairs to the balcony. One-on-one preliminary matches, she whispered as they walked. She nodded to the giant statue, and Naruto noticed a large screen had appeared behind it, displaying the names Uchiha Sasuke and Akado Yoroi. They're randomizing the names, she added, and those two are the first matchup. The pair took up a position far away from the other competitors, Haro and Kakuzu following their lead. Naruto noticed that most of the Leaf Ninja were grouped close together, while the team from the Hidden Sand stood far away from the rest, nearest the stairs. He turned his attention to the arena, where the last of the loyal Uchiha was taking up an unusual stance against a purple-clothed man. There were no significant distinguishing traits about him, though his outfit signified his allegiance to the unknown silver-haired genin, who had disappeared at some point, Naruto noted belatedly. I should really pay more attention. With that thought in mind, Naruto focused on the combatants as the first match started. If he had any hope of advancing through the Chunin exams and fulfilling his oath of revenge, the best idea would be to observe the competition. Though he didn't know the reason, Naruto noticed rather quickly that the Uchiha down below was fighting, rather ineffectively, with only taijutsu as the other genin stole his chakra. As a clan, the Uchiha had been renowned for their prowess and variability with fire, ninjutsu, a side effect of possessing the Sharingan. The fact that Sasuke was not using either his Kekkei Genkai or any ninjutsu was a bit strange. As Yoroi dove forward with a proclamation of victory, Sasuke appeared under him and kicked him skyward. Maybe he's trying to prove a point, Naruto mused as the Uchiha followed his opponent into the air. Sure Rindan! Shouted Sasuke, propelling the older genin into the ground with a hard kick. The proctor, a short, sickly-looking man wearing a bandana, who had introduced himself as Gecko Hate, knelt over Yoroi to check his condition before pronouncing the adolescent unconscious. When Sasuke was declared the winner, Kakashi appeared behind his student and took him away. Kakuzu hemmed thoughtfully. It appears as if the Uchiha clan still retains a fearsome reputation despite a lack of quantity, mulled the old ninja. He will make a fine bounty someday. Kakuzu recognized that he wasn't playing to his strengths, too, Naruto thought. It wasn't altogether surprising considering how analytical Kakuzu was, but it was still nice to have the confirmation of his own thoughts reflected by his mentor. Begin! Naruto snapped back to attention, focusing upon the two figures currently, standing completely motionless. Judging by the high collar of one and the black bodysuit of the other, the matchup was the Aburame versus Gaara's male teammate. Placed next to the Sunanin was a bulky, bandaged thing. The proctor coughed into the silence, the sound unnaturally loud in the stillness of the auditorium. Naruto shifted from one foot to the other, Fu twitched uncomfortably. Someone shouted something about youth. The sand ninja collapsed like a puppet with its strings cut. Kankuro! Gasped the female Sunanin. The bandaged lump began to writhe uncontrollably before it unwrapped to reveal a howling Kankuro. He slapped at his clothes as Fu turned to Kakuzu in explanation. What just happened? Kakuzu gestured towards the arena. It appears as if the Aburame will explain. Indeed, the bug Nin had already launched into a brief monologue. My Kikaichu latched onto your body and tried to siphon out your chakra. Imagine their surprise when the body they attacked had no chakra circulatory system, but instead a series of chakra strings trailing to your actual body. The Aburame adjusted his dark glasses. It was unfortunate that you were matched against me. Such a tactic would have perhaps worked against an opponent who did not have the capability to track and neutralize chakra. He glanced towards the proctor. It would be prudent of you to call the match. My opponent will very shortly have no chakra left unless my insects are commanded to leave him alone. The proctor called the match in favor of Aburame Shino. There was silence as names flickered across the board, Naruto staring intently down into the arena in preparation for the next match. Suddenly, Fu chirped, "My turn," and moved towards the stairs. Naruto hooked a hand around her elbow before she moved out of his range. Don't do anything fancy, he warned her. Remember that we're still trying to stay under the radar. The Nanabai Jinchuriki nodded, prompting the blonde to release his hold on her. She continued to the stairs, making a point to ignore the teal eyes of Gaara boring into her head as she passed. Entering the combat area, Fu took her place across from a rotund boy, a Kimichi Choji, if the screen announcing matches was any indication, and waited for the proctor to signal the beginning of the match. The sickly man did so, and Choji immediately shot her an apologetic glance. I don't like fighting, but Asuma-sensei said he'll buy me barbecue if I win. He formed two hand signs and shouted, Baika no Jutsu. Fu fought the urge to laugh. Where once stood a slightly chubby boy, now was, for lack of a better description, a large ball. Interesting attack, she managed with a slight giggle. I'm not done yet. Nikuden Sensha. Jets of chakra shot out from Choji's clothing as he tucked his arms, legs, and head into his body and began to spin. The spinning turned into a powerful roll which immediately moved in Fu's direction. Okay, slightly more impressive, she amended, jumping aside as the genin passed by. He was forced to turn in a wide, slow arc to target her again. Slow-moving, relatively linear attack. This shouldn't be too hard. Fu waited until Choji was only 24 feet away before forming quick seals. Tiger, hare, boar, dog. Doton, Doria Hiki. The green-haired girl slapped her hands to the ground, and a 4-foot-thick wall of stone rose from the floor. Choji struck the defensive technique and immediately fell out of his human bullet tank, looking dazed. The earth-style wall cracked and fell on top of him, several large rocks striking his head and knocking him unconscious. Hade came over and analyzed Choji's condition before announcing the kunoichi as the winner. Naruto cocked his head to the side in mild curiosity. That victory seemed a bit too easy. Granted, Fu should have been stronger than a vast majority of the genin present. He should have been stronger than a vast majority of the genin present, too. Not that that had prevented him from being beaten in the forest of death, but after watching the impressive physical and analytical displays of both the Uchiha and the Aburame boys, respectively, the Akimichi's exhibition was rather disappointing. Unbeknownst to Naruto, Fu's round set a precedent for a series of unflattering matches for the Konoha genin. The next battle ended up being a veritable catfight between the platinum blonde Yamanaka Ino and the pink-haired girl on the Uchiha's team, Harino Sakura, according to the screen. There was a long exchange of kicks and punches, during which Naruto almost screamed at how asinine the battle was, where nothing resulted but stamina depletion on both sides. Naruto would admit to being marginally impressed with the Yamanaka's ingenuity of using her own hair as a chakra conduit to trap Sakura and activate her clan's mind-body switch technique and take victory from there. After the two girls made it back up to the balcony, Temari, the blonde, female Sunanin, and Tsurugi Misumi, the teammate of the Uchiha's opponent, were called down to the battlefield. The match piqued Naruto's interest primarily because of the fan Temari wielded, a potential sign of her aptitude with wind ninjutsu. Having the same elemental affinity, he was curious to see what abilities she possessed. When the proctor announced the beginning of the fight, Misumi immediately moved towards Temari with an almost flowing motion. She kept him at a distance with bursts of chakra-enhanced winds until he got around them with an impossible-looking twisting motion. The leaf nin slithered towards the kunoichi, who folded up her fan and swung when Misumi came into range. There was a resounding crack as the fan's protective steel casing connected with Misumi's skull. Most of the spectators winced at the sound, and even Naruto was unable to completely suppress his own small grimace. Below, the leaf genin dropped in a boneless heap. Temari smirked as the proctor called the match in her favor. Naruto would have been able to accept these losses on Konoha's behalf and given them the benefit that there was some talented ninja among their ranks if it wasn't for the next round. Hyuga Niji was paired up against Hyuga Hinata, and judging by the trembling of the girl's hands and body, it was not a battle she wished to partake in. The point was proven further when, instead of moving into anything resembling the Juken style of taijutsu Naruto knew a little about, courtesy of Kakuzu, Niji remained upright and began to berate and ridicule his relative. Naruto mentally snorted at the tactic. The Hyuga were renowned as a proud and powerful clan, and it would come as a huge disgrace to have what appeared to be their clan heiress, if what Niji was saying was true, give up against a branch family member. "I forfeit," stammered Hinata. Naruto's jaw almost dropped. That's the power of the Hyuga clan. That's pathetic. Outraged and insulted at the display of cowardice, the blonde had to be prodded out of his shock by Fu. "You're up," she whispered, and Naruto looked at the screen to find Inuzuka Kiba vs. Shinobu displayed in large letters. Okay, thought the blonde, making his way to the arena, I can't use Jianga or more than one type of nature manipulation, way too suspicious for a genin. Probably should stick with futon, since I haven't learned that much doton and there isn't much water here for suiton. There's my kenjutsu, he considered, taking his place across from the wild-looking Inuzuka Kiba, but I won't be able to use any wind manipulation with it cause of how advanced it is. Taijutsu? He peered curiously at the leaf genin and dog facing him. Maybe. Begin. Shinobu. Kiba shouted, you may as well give up now, cause me and Akamaru are gonna wipe the floor with you. The small white pup standing next to the Konohanin barked his agreement. Naruto felt his eyebrow twitch in annoyance. Geez, is this what it's like for Kakuzu to deal with me? What a pain, no wonder he's always so cranky. As the fake genin silently swore to refrain from overestimating his abilities around Kakuzu ever again, the Nukanin's words from the other night echoed in his head. I'll take my time and choose my attacks carefully. Wait for him to make the first move and then decide how to counter it. Gijyu Ninpo, Shikyaku no Jutsu. Kiba dropped to all fours, and Naruto watched as the boy's nails grew longer, his pupils turning into animalistic slits. Then Kiba charged. Naruto's eyes widened marginally. Fast. Despite his surprise, the blonde quickly twisted out of the way of the attack, allowing the Inuzuka to fly by harmlessly. Kiba landed on the floor, claws gouging marks into the tile. He growled slightly, palming several objects Naruto recognized as smoke bombs. They were tossed towards the incognito genin, exploding upon impact and filling the immediate area with smoke. Naruto guessed that most genin would find the haze limiting, but that strategy wouldn't work against a wind user. He slapped his palms together and then pointed them at the ground, muttering futon, repusho. Suddenly, he was airborne. The aerial view allowed for him to oversee the second effect of the violent wind palm, the dispersion of the smoke. He landed easily on his feet and faced Kiba, who growled in slight frustration. Let's go, Akamaru. The Konohanin threw a pill at his partner, whose fur immediately turned a burnt red color, before crunching on one himself. Their chakra boosted, Akamaru jumped atop Kiba's back, prompting the boy to create a hand sign. Gijyu Ninpo, Jujin Bunshin. With a poof of smoke, two feral-looking Kibas replaced the boy and his dog, both in the taijutsu stance of the four legs technique Kiba had activated earlier. The pair dove for Naruto in a wild lunge, claws outstretched. He danced around the first attack and ducked the second, unsheathing his wakizashi and catching the nails of a swipe with the blade from the first, doubling back. Then began a fluid pattern of dodging both man-beast clones, attempting to antagonize Kiba into making a mistake through his inability to land a hit. After several more passes, all close enough where Naruto could feel the breeze from the attacks, the Inuzuka and his pet immediately moved into dual, powerful tornadoes with a roar of Gutsuga. The undercover rain ninja blinked. Well, that's not good. He formed the seals for the wind release, great breakthrough, focusing on shaping the wind to be blunt instead of slicing. Pushing forward with his hands, a thick wall of air was sent out, crafted to deflect the two gray whirls heading straight for him. Kiba and his clone were forced to separate to avoid the attack, creating just enough space for Naruto to capitalize on his technique. Taking his wakizashi, the blonde raised the weapon and sliced into the higher of the two gray tornadoes while narrowly evading the second one. There was a yip of pain as both likenesses of Kiba landed behind Naruto, the one he'd attacked transforming back into Akamaru. Red slashes were visible on the small dog's legs, and he lay down to lick his wounds, whining pitifully. Kiba somehow managed to look even more feral at this discovery. You'll pay for hurting Akamaru. He howled at the Jinchuriki. Tsuga! As the drilling tornado that was Kiba lunged towards him, Naruto knew that he had to end the battle. Before Jiangu, before water and earth releases, before Kenjutsu, Naruto had worked on his mastery over wind release jutsu. He was by no means an expert at futon techniques, but Kakuzu had taught him enough of the basics that the blonde had a good idea of how to manipulate the formless element. It was a challenge, and with all the subsequent training he had found little time to actually continue focusing on it, but he had created one technique that, theoretically, would be powerful enough to end the fight. Worth a shot, he muttered, carefully molding his chakra and forming the needed seals. Wind whipped around him, ruffling his clothes as it became concentrated around his right fist. Futon, he began, drawing back the entire limb. Kiba was 15 feet away. Senpuken! In the instant Naruto threw his punch, all the condensed air was released in the form of a miniature cyclone roughly 6 inches in diameter. At such close range and with a huge amount of chakra pumped into it, the ninjutsu collided with and easily overran Kiba's taijutsu, blowing the animalistic boy away and into the far wall. Cracks spiderwebbed out from the leaf Genin's point of impact, and he remained imprinted in the concrete for a number of seconds before collapsing face first to the tiled floor with a groan. Hade coughed. Winner, Shinobu of Amigakure. Congrats! Cheered Fu upon Naruto's return to the balcony. She moved forward as if to embrace him, but thought better of it, and instead gave him a bright smile. Naruto returned it with one of his own, though it ended up looking cheekier than his companions. It was an impressive display of your skill, Haro commented. The blonde took this as a sign that the boy recognized his abilities, and merely nodded in response. He looked to Kakuzu, secretly hoping for some sign from the older ninja that he had done well. When the man inclined his head slightly, Naruto turned his attention back to the floor, a small grin on his features. Though he hated to admit it, Kakuzu's opinion of his skill did matter to the boy. Seeking approval from the one person who had seen something great in him was not unexpected, simply desirable given his former background in Konoha, he rationalized. Satisfied with the fact that his teacher acknowledged what he was capable of, Naruto vaguely heard Fu wishing Haro good luck. Curious, the Jinchuriki glanced at the screen announcing competitors, finding that the next battle was between Haro and Sai, the vaguely Uchiha lookalike from the same team. While the two males prepared to face off, Naruto registered that Haro looked off. It took a moment to realize why, but his eyes widened marginally when a peripheral glance at his feet confirmed his thoughts. The twin katana that Haro normally carried with him were placed on the floor next to him instead of sheathed on his back. Naruto opened his mouth to say something about this anomaly, but then decided not to. Haro had proven himself intelligent, if not frustrating at times with his single-minded devotion to Pain-sama, which led to the conclusion that the cobalt-haired youth knew what he was doing. Below, Haro and Sai were enmeshed in a silent taijutsu battle, either combatant giving an inch. Watching intently, Naruto was able to admit the Kyushojutsu style of combat which Haro employed was rather impressive when not outnumbered 3-1. It was fluid and graceful in execution, almost comparable to what he had heard about Juken. Though it was strange that he hadn't yet landed a hit on the Konohanin. Naruto's eyes narrowed suspiciously as Haro blocked Sai's tanto with a kunai, the clang of metal on metal resounding clearly to the balcony. So, perhaps we're not the only higher-level ninja in these exams. It seems that even Konoha doesn't play fair when it comes to certain things. Or people, he amended, revisiting the concept that Sai was on the Uchiha's team. Sai jumped back as Haro struck a pressure point on his arm. The fight had continued in a relative stalemate for long enough that he was getting rather tired of keeping up his facade. Putting some more distance between him and his opponent, Sai whipped out his specialized scroll and quickly drew a bird. Choji Giga, he stated, using his chakra to bring the bird to life. The ink construct melded out from the scroll and its creator jumped onto its back, taking to the air and contemplating his next move. Haro stared at his opponent, now flying high above him. He turned to the proctor and raised his hand. I forfeit, he announced, much to the surprise of his teammates. Hade confirmed the decision, allowing the Aimnin to make his way back to where his temporary team was waiting. Why'd you quit? Naruto asked quietly when he returned, Fu bouncing on the balls of her feet nearby. You didn't even try any right-on techniques. It would have been suspicious if an entire team of no-names from AIM passed to the finals, Haro explained after a moment. I thought it better to give up rather than bring unwanted attention to our team by fighting at my hardest. Which was why you left your swords behind, Naruto realized. Well, yes and no. These katana, he said, replacing the sheath upon his frame, were formerly owned by one of the 7 shinobi swordsmen of the mist. Meaning they're easily recognizable, the blonde extrapolated. Yes. Still doesn't explain why you didn't use any ninjutsu. Haro shot him a reproachful look. You used futon and Kazi used oton, albeit a rather basic one. You don't think adding a third teammate with a completely separate elemental affinity, let alone the fact that none of them were Suiton and we're supposedly from AIM, where water affinities are most common, wouldn't raise suspicion? Fair enough, Naruto admitted. There was a tense period where he wasn't sure what else to say and Haro seemed to be waiting for him to speak. Good job, he offered, and Haro nodded before turning away. Whoa, gasped Fu. Naruto's head swiveled away from Haro and towards the arena, where Rock Lee was busy fighting Sabaka no Gaara. The Leaf-Nin seemed to be disappearing and reappearing at random intervals, trying to break through the sand that was swirling around Gaara. What's going on? Naruto requested. Behind him, Kakuzu sighed. Considering the fact that the Sunanin is actively looking to kill both you and your teammate, your lack of attention to this battle is severely disappointing. I was trying to understand Haro's strategy, protested Naruto. Kakuzu waved off the excuse as if it were a particularly annoying fly. I care little for whatever pretenses you have fabricated. He paused, as if to give Naruto a moment to either feel ashamed or retort. The blonde did neither. However, based off of what I have witnessed of the fight, Rock Lee has thrived under the tutelage of Mado Guy. His taijutsu form is of an extremely high caliber for a genin. As Kakuzu spoke, Lee stepped back from Gaara and opened the fifth of the 8 gates. Your friend from Sunagakure, on the other hand, Kakuzu continued sardonically, appears to have absolutely no taijutsu abilities whatsoever, and in fact has barely moved at all from his original position. His control over sand, something which I am sure can be correlated directly to his host status. Naruto was sure Kakuzu phrased it to be purposefully ambiguous so as to not give Haro more information than he needed to know, however, is unparalleled in comparison to anything I have ever seen. He appears to have some form of automatic defense that seems nigh impregnable, and so far has only proven ineffective in the presence of extreme speed. The bounty hunter paused in his analysis as Gaara, skin appearing to crack and break off in flakes of sand as a result of Lee's reverse lotus, reached out and grabbed him exhaustedly by his leg and arm with tendrils of sand, crushing the limbs with vindictive pleasure. Apparently he also has some sort of sand armor coating his body, and appears to be clinically insane, Kakuzu finished blandly, and rather unnecessarily, Naruto thought irritably. He had clearly seen that. The man glanced at his first pupil. Quite an enemy you two have. Naruto gulped. Yeah, he murmured. He shot a cursory glance at Fu, whose eyes were wide with poorly disguised fear. But he's threatened Fu, and for that he needs to be defeated, he thought, reaffirming his decision to protect his friend at all costs. The last preliminary match, between a girl named Tenten and one Nara Shikamaru, commenced with little fanfare. Naruto would admit that Tenten seemed to be skilled with a specialty dabbling in, seemingly limitless, mixed weaponry, but the activation of her ultimate technique, Sashoryu, or Twin Rising Dragons, provided so much shadow from the summoned steel projectiles that the Nara was easily able to use his Kagemain no Jutsu to trap her. Shikamaru forced her to pick up a kunai and hold it to her throat, drawling lazily that she should forfeit. She acquiesced despondently, and the proctor announced Shikamaru's victory amidst the cheering of his 2 teammates. Shikamaru took the moment to try and slink back up to the balcony, but the examiner stopped him partway. Will the winners of the preliminary matches please come down to the floor? He called. Naruto and Fu exchanged shrugs, but followed the small procession of victors down from the viewing balcony to the arena floor. The blonde only half listened as the third Hokage stepped forward and explained that the finals, the real third round of the Chunin exams, would take place in a month, in front of a huge audience in order to properly showcase the talents of the prospective Chunin. The Kyubi Jinchuriki drowned out the unnecessary background noise, instead contemplating the skills that Konoha's genin had displayed. Most of the major clans had been represented in some way in the preliminaries, and even though their abilities were limited by age, the exams had given Naruto a better idea of what each family was capable of. Books only got one so far, especially considering how rare they were outside of the village hidden in the leaves, and Kakuzu had tried to avoid Konoha as much as possible after his failed assassination of the Shodai Hokage, meaning that his information was also limited. But to see firsthand what the clan specialized in allowed Naruto to better plan how to exact vengeance against the Hidden Leaf, which was so far proving to be impossible. Even assuming years of training and escape from Akatsuki's clutches, one man, no matter how powerful, stood little chance against the force of an entire village, especially when said village had chakra-eating bugs, X-ray vision, body possession and controlling techniques, and the potential to become giants. Not to mention all the regular forces not belonging to clans. The blonde scowled, thinking about Sai and his apparent ability to animate ink. Guerrilla warfare might be the best option, he decided after a period of thought. Get stronger, and then use bounty hunting to pick off the stronger ninja one at a time. After that, maybe I can find a way to invade the village itself. When a box was shoved in his direction, Naruto automatically reached inside and grabbed a slip of paper. Despite his inner musings, the proceedings were boring him, and it reflected clearly in his voice when he was asked to read the number imprinted on the sheet. He had learned some manner of patience over his years training with Kakuzu, but his personality required that there was some means to an end in waiting patiently, some higher reason for it. This formal drivel was pushing his attention span to its limit with its pointlessness. He snapped back to attention as the final pairings were decided. Peering intently at the brackets, he saw that Aburaim Shino and Sai were fighting the first battle. He was slated to duel Hyuga Niji in the second round, followed by Naro Shikamaru and the Sunanin Temari, Uchiha Sasuke vs. Gaara, and then Fu against Yamanaka Ino. Despite what Kakuzu had said about Gaara's abilities, Naruto hoped that the Uchiha would win the fight so that Fu might not have to fight Gaara in the following round. The blonde registered Kakuzu's presence behind him, and realized belatedly that they had all been dismissed. What now, Aizo-sensei? Kakuzu stared down at him. We train. Naruto cursed as Fu slammed her fist through the head of his earth clone. The copy turned brown and slumped to the ground as formless mud. Concentration broken, the second clone he was creating also lost its cohesion and fell apart only halfway emerged from the ground. Better, Fu offered sympathetically. Naruto merely scowled. The past 2 weeks had been spent in a training field far removed from the main activity of Konoha's populace. It allowed Fu and Naruto to train to their full extent, though Kakuzu prohibited Naruto from using either Jianga or summons, while Haro did his own exercises and Kakuzu either researched information or oversaw their progress. Frustratingly enough, Kakuzu had found it pertinent to interfere in the training and suggest, mock mercilessly until an enraged Naruto accepted, that Fu teach her fellow Jinchuriki the finer points of Doton ninjutsu. Despite what should have been a natural affinity to him because of his kinjutsu, the blonde had struggled to learn several of the techniques Fu had decided to teach him. The earth clone technique had come relatively easily to the blonde, probably, he guessed, because of his previous training with Kisame in the art of creating water clones, though he found that if his concentration was broken, the replicas would fall apart immediately. That discovery had led Naruto to being rather irked with his incompatibility with earth-released ninjutsu. He was a natural at futon, far better than Fu, something even Kakuzu found he could not nitpick about, and even Suiton had come to him more naturally than Doton was. He simply couldn't understand what was wrong. It wasn't that he couldn't perform the earth-related elemental techniques, just that they were annoyingly difficult to master. The few that were a part of his repertoire were simple, supplementary techniques, not quite on the level of Fu's Doton, Doria Hiki. Oh well, he sighed, just another thing to practice, along with Genjutsu. It was one of his more inspiring idiosyncrasies, he figured, the desire to push through and eventually overcome any weaknesses in his abilities. Training with Kisame in Kenjutsu and Suiton techniques had prompted a mindset capable of putting aside thoughts of impatience and rashness to learn those skills to the best of his ability. Learning to control both futon and jianga had gone in much the same fashion, though in solitude rather than being taught. No matter how long it took him, Naruto would figure out how to use damn earth-released ninjutsu. Meanwhile, Fu formed a single-hand scion and a small breeze kicked up the dirt next to her, transforming into her perfect replica. Show off, he muttered. What, don't think you're a match for a single Chiri Bunshin? Fu mocked in a pale imitation of Kakuzu. Naruto smirked. Suiton, miserapa. He expelled a stream of water which struck the copy, waterlogging the dirt and destroying the fragile consistency of Fu's specialized element. Ha! Crowed the blonde, your Chiri Bunshin can't stand up against a little water, huh? he taunted. Fu merely made the sign of the snake, and the moist dirt reformed into a solid tsuchi bunshin. Crap. Haro watched as Naruto dodged the double team of Fu and her clone. I wasn't told much when I was assigned this mission, but shouldn't we come up with some form of strategy for whatever our plan of attack is? He asked Kakuzu without removing his eyes from the spar. Naruto threw a wind jutsu at Fu, who countered with an earth-style wall. Seated cross-legged on the ground, back against a tree, an ever-present scroll in his lap, Kakuzu snorted. If there were some measure of completing such a feat, these Konoha fools have cleverly hidden or disposed of any useful evidence with which to do so. He paused to consider his words as Naruto shoved his wakizashi through the earth clone's head and began gloating. An oxymoron, to be sure. It seems we chose a good moment to arrive. Yeah, what good timing. Haro whirled on the spot, a noise of surprise escaping his lips and hands reaching for his swords. Sticking out from the trunk of the tree Kakuzu was leaning against, a solid 3 feet above the man's head, was the Venus fly-trap-encased form of the man who had led Haro to the Akatsuki hideout, Setsu, if he remembered correctly. Kakuzu, on the other hand, appeared completely unfazed. In fact, he hadn't even made a motion to recognize the Akatsuki agent's presence. He folded up his scroll and stood up, Setsu moving out of the way of his 6-foot frame. Brushing specks of dust from his clothes, he drawled, "Ah, Zetsu, I was wondering if you would perhaps show up, again, without ever glancing at the other ninja. Your presence would suggest that we are not under surveillance, correct?" "Oh, but Kakuzu-san, it almost sounds as if you're displeased to see us," fretted Zetsu's white side as his black half replied, "No one is nearby." "No, I always look forward to your haphazard appearances," Kakuzu deadpanned, turning to face him. "They always bode so well for me and my personal agenda." "We are here to provide you with information, not send you to do some task," snarled Black Setsu, as his entire head bobbed up and down in what Kakuzu inferred to be the white half nodding in agreement. "As former associates of Orochimaru, we have intelligence which you might be lacking and thus find useful. Leader-sama said that since you're doing a favor for us, we should tell you all we know," added White Setsu. "If you would rather us leave, though, we do have other matters to attend to." "Wait." Setsu, who had slowly started sinking back into the tree, stopped. Kakuzu resisted the homicidal urge he normally experienced when frustrated, knowing that killing the Akatsuki member, or at least attempting to, would be a bad idea. "Brats, get over here. Or get me out of this thing, you stupid bitch." "Not with that mouth, I'm not. Say I'm better than you." "Never." Kakuzu could feel the headache associated with dealing with idiots building. Eyebrow twitching in mixed annoyance and rage, he shifted his attention towards the 2 wayward Jinchuriki. Naruto was trapped up to his waist in a dark pool of sludge, Fu's earth release, swamp of the underworld, a technique he had taught her, hands also submerged beneath the mud and therefore unable to break free. Opposite him, the green-haired girl was sitting on the ground, watching her fellow Biju container struggle to escape her ninjutsu, and laughing. The bounty hunter growled and both of his arms lashed out at his pupils. The seemingly infinite amount of black threads his body possessed allowed Kakuzu to clear the field's distance easily. His right hand grasped the top of Naruto's blonde head, instantly quieting the boy, while the left one latched around Fu's face and conveniently stifled her laughter. With a thought, Kakuzu willed the tendrils to shorten, returning his arms to the rest of his body. Naruto popped free of the swamp with an audible squelching sound. He flew through the air and landed belly first on the ground in front of his teacher with a groan. Simultaneously, Fu was dragged roughly across the earth and deposited next to her blonde companion. With both Jinchuriki in front of him, Kakuzu released his grip and allowed his arms to fully reattach to his body. "Your interest in my motives implies that you are interested in whatever information we can get," he told them with slight vindication. Then he turned to face Setsu. "Continue." Setsu blinked. "That was kinda mean, Kakuzu-san. You should be more careful with your students." "I liked it, brutal and effective." Kakuzu stared at him silently, red-green eyes narrowing marginally. "Oh, the information. As you know, Orochimaru is supposed to attack the village sometime during the 3rd section of the Chunin exams," explained White Setsu, suddenly serious. His plans involve a combined attack from Suna and Oto backed by the presence of Sabaka no Gara, the Jinchuriki of the Ichibi. I know all of this. Conan informed me of the basics before I took this ridiculous mission, Kakuzu told him impatiently, skating over the fact that he had only recently learned of Oto's existence. Get to the point. Testy, observed Black Zetsu, but very well. Though we are unsure of the exact circumstances, we know that Orochimaru's plan hinges on releasing Ichibi no Shikaku within Konoha. We believe that he intends on using the chaos the Biju's presence will create to assassinate the Sandaime Hokage and fulfill his desire for revenge against Konoha. Naruto began muttering lowly about what an interesting idea that was, but didn't interrupt the plan man. There is also evidence to support that Orochimaru may have his sights set upon Uchiha Sasuke, assuming his quest to learn all the world's ninjutsu is still a priority. Little else is known of his actual invasion plans. He will need to be near the Hokage when the Ichibi is released so as to quickly corner him with minimal outside interference. We believe that Orochimaru may be posing as the Kazekage, though this is purely speculation. The snake is also somewhat paranoid, rightfully so, and is bound to have some sort of guard around him at all times. Kakuzu waited until he was sure Zetsu was done talking before asking, "What do you know of Orochimaru's abilities?" White Zetsu grinned. "More than you found, I'm sure. Orochimaru was known for dabbling in ninjutsu and kinjutsu, so you should expect him to know a wide variety of both elemental and forbidden techniques. Sasori said that he often used a sword in combat which he kept hidden in his mouth within a snake," added White Zetsu cheekily. His contract with the snakes provided him with inspiration for a unique taijutsu style as well as several body modification techniques, and summoning, of course. Kakuzu raised an eyebrow. Body modification techniques? Orochimaru has an extremely flexible body, allowing him to twist unnaturally and extend certain body features at his whim. Kinda like you, White Zetsu offered with unnecessary enthusiasm. The former Takinin scowled. Also, he can recover from any injury and escape from many attacks using an enhanced form of the Kawarini, like a serpent shedding its skin. We're not exactly sure of the details, but it apparently uses a larger amount of chakra than normal. The rest is up to you. Good luck. Zetsu disappeared in the blink of an eye, leaving a silent training field behind. Kakuzu mulled over the basics of what he had just been told. Ninjutsu, kenjutsu, a summoning contract, snake-like taijutsu, flexibility, and a specialized kawarini. You appear to be a jack of all trades, Orochimaru. I look forward to this fight. The S-class ninja looked down, spying Naruto, Fu, and Haro looking at him with a variety of expressions, apathy, minor concern, and curiosity predominant. Fu, Haro, you have 2 weeks to practice and perfect any techniques you wish to work on, he ordered. Both nodded and immediately moved to the center of the field and began sparring. Naruto, he continued in the same authoritative voice. The blonde flinched slightly in surprise at the use of his name but did little else. You will learn one of my most useful ninjutsu, a move which may come in handy against the Hyuga you are supposed to fight. Even if it does not, its practical uses are relatively limitless and will serve you well in the future. Now come, we have much work ahead of us. Naruto followed his teacher into the nearby copse of trees, a small grin on his face. Being taught directly by Kakuzu, while guaranteed to be immensely painful, was likely to be invaluable, and the intensity he felt radiating from the older ninja's very being indicated that his assumption was probably correct. For the next 2 weeks, Kakuzu drilled the trio of undercover genin relentlessly. By the end of the fortnight, all of them felt that they were ready for whatever the Chunin exams would throw at them. If they only knew,